All right, so the question, well, now we got the recording notice here. So the question is, why sign? Well, that's the question that may be the bottom line question for all folks, for all residents in the city. It really depends upon how you compare your current rental agreement terms with the terms of the MOU. For folks, again, who are month to month, the MOU is going to automatically apply to you, and most assuredly, it's going to be better than anything that you otherwise have as a month to month resident, because as month to month, under law, you could get a rent increase every 30 days, essentially because the agreement renews itself every 30 days. Now, mobile home residents need 90 days notice. So for mobile home residents, it would actually be once every 90 days. So the MOU provides certainty for you. It probably provides a better rental amount than anything that the park owner could otherwise charge month to month. And it gives you vacancy control protection upon resale, where the park can only increase rents by a certain amount. And that's important because, again, under month-to-month agreements, you don't have that typically at all. The park owner could increase rent to your buyer to any amount it wants. And vacancy control is critical because for every $100 the rent increases, your equity decreases by $10,000. That's what we call a paired analysis that's been done by different cities and which is pretty accepted within the mobile home industry. I'm going to slow myself a little bit because I forgot about the translators. So why sign? Again, you would sign if it's best for you, and each person needs to determine that for themselves. And what you should do is get out your rental agreement, especially if you're on a long-term lease. Get that out and set it side by side with the MOU. And you want to compare what your rental agreement says about annual base rent increases. And you want to compare what the MOU says about annual base rent increases, which is, as our screen just showed you, 75% of CPI with a minimum of 3%. You want to compare what your long-term lease says about pass-throughs, property taxes, capital expenditures, things like that, and then compare what the MOU says about pass-throughs. I'm going to believe that in most cases, the MOU pass-through terms will be better than your long-term lease pass-through terms. Thirdly, and most importantly, you want to check about the resale rent increases. What can the park owner increase rent to when you sell your home? Because a number of the long-term leases that I've seen in Sunnyvale either have no limitation because they don't even mention the issue of resale rent increases, or the increase amount's pretty high. And what we've negotiated in the MOU is a phased in increase approach. 5% the first year, 10% the second year, meaning 1 or 2 years from the time that the MOU commences. And that was October, I think it was October 18th, if I recall. And then after that, limited to 15% increase upon resale. Then Plaza del Rey has the caps. So why sign? The answer is based on that comparison that you would do. You would sign if you're a long-term leaseholder and you believe the MOU financial terms are better for you than the current lease terms that you have.
Thank you for that answer, Bruce. I'm going to move on to the questions that are in the chat. The first question we have is, when my current lease runs out, do I automatically fall under the MOU? In other words, should I sign now or wait for it to roll over? Either Nadia or Bruce can answer this question.
I don't want to hog all the time, so.
Well, I mean, you know this better than me, so.
Okay,
I'll let you
I'll
answer.
just jump in anytime, Nadia. Well, look, it really depends upon whether you want to be covered now, right? It depends upon whether or not it's beneficial for you to be covered immediately. Because if you don't sign by the end of December, unless you're in one of the parks where the date's going to be extended out because the owner didn't make the documents available by November 1st like they were supposed to. And that's in a couple of the parks. But if you want to be covered during the rest of your lease term, then you need to make that decision to sign now. Otherwise, you could just wait until your present lease expires, and then they have to offer you the MOU terms at that time for the next agreement that comes along. But if you miss this window for the rest of your term that you have now, you won't be covered. So that's why that analysis that you want to do, comparing mostly those three things that I just mentioned, is important in making that decision.
Wonderful. We're going to move on to the next questions. Parents bought home in Plaza del Rey last year when rents were very high. We got a special concession for a couple of years with a discounted rent, but after agreement terms completes, the rent will settle at a higher rate than the market rate. What impact would signing the MOU have if signed now? And what impact would happen if we wait until after the end of the term for the rent discount? That one's a more specific question.
Yeah, I was trying to make sure I followed the question. It sounds like the question's really going to the issue of the rent increase that would occur upon resale. And again, most of the Plaza leases that I'm aware of don't have any caps, any resale caps, or the caps are pretty high. So if the intent or the expectation is that you're going to sell in the near future, I would say you would want to sign the lease addendum. In Plaza, that means that there's a cap as well that's going into place. And it really depends upon whether you've already reached that cap. It's $2,250. If your rent's already there, then the increase that your buyer would receive is zero. Because that number only begins to increase as each year goes by according to the percentage increase in the CPI. We call that indexing. So that 2250 number will gradually go up as a cap in Plaza del Rey as each year's inflation percentage is added onto it. But again, if you have a lease there now and the increase on resale is virtually unlimited, then you would want to sign, I think, the addendum as somebody contemplating selling in the near future so that you could take advantage of that cap. I think the person was in Plaza del Rey, if I remember in the question, yeah.
All right, if anyone needs clarifications on the questions that they initially submitted and were answered, please let us know in the chat and we will get to that as we roll through all the questions. The next one is, what is considered a long-term lease? More than a year?
Under state law, the answer is yes. Under state law, the long-term lease exemption from local rent control, that, by the way, is now phasing out. That'll be gone by January 1st of 2025 for all agreements. But yes, under state law, any agreement in excess of 12 months was considered a long-term lease.
Thank you. We have a question from someone saying, I'm in year 3. So they are currently in their year number 3 of a 10-year long-term lease at Adobe Wells with a 1970s vintage home, which is very cool, by the way. The MOU terms are very similar regarding rent increases, both monthly and on resale. Does the MOU have any application for rent increases on replacements, or would the terms of the 10-year lease stay in place?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question, but I'm assuming when we talk about replacement, we're talking about replacing the home on the space. I'm not sure about that. If that's the question, the answer is you could replace your home with a newer home. Maybe that's why the word vintage was used in the question. Yes, you have the ability to replace your home with a newer home if the park owner consents to that in terms of the size of the home, if it's going to fit on the space, and you'll need to submit a plot plan and so forth. And yes, the replacement of the home will have no effect upon the running of the MOU protection. It will continue to apply for the balance of your lease term to the new home if you sign the lease addendum now.
All right, we will wait for clarification on that question, if there is any clarification. But we'll move on to our next question. We have a question. My current lease ends May 2022. I have signed a 25-year lease that begins when my current lease ends. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is if I don't sign the MOU for my current lease, it will be automatically part of my 25-year lease.
Well, the MOU terms provide that at the expiration of your current lease, the MOU must be offered to you as part of the terms of any new agreement. The interesting twist here is that this next lease has already been signed, which is pretty unique in my experience. Nadia may also agree with that. But I would say that even though you've already signed the next document, presumably it doesn't take effect until your current lease expires. So according to the MOU terms, yes, they would automatically apply to the next agreement, in my opinion. I would clarify with the park owner, with park management, that that is also their interpretation. We may want to even clarify that with the city because it is unique, again, that someone would sign a lease now that doesn't take effect until sometime in the future. Typically, you'd wait until much closer to the expiration of your current lease. But that would be my opinion, that it would automatically be part of that.
All right, we have another question. This one's relating to month. Can rent be raised at any time or on the anniversary date?
The MOU provides that rent can only be raised once per year, and that would occur on the anniversary date of your most recent increase if you're month to month.
Next question. This is about resell. What is the penalty if we choose to sell in 5 years?
Well, there's no penalty, if you will. I wouldn't use the word penalty. The question, I think, is what will the increase be to the new buyer if we sell our home 5 years from now? And under the MOU, beginning on year 3, there's a 15% rent increase until year 20, which is when the MOU expires. So the answer really would be if you sell in year 5, the rent increase to the new buyer would be 15%.
So there's really no penalty.
No, there's no penalty. No. Like there's no extra charge or anything like that. No.
All right. Just to pinging one of these Spanish translators, we do have some questions in Spanish. So if you could translate that in our doc, that would be great. And we could get some answers for those. But moving on to the next question. When do we get these MOU leases and where do we get them?
Well, you were supposed to already have received them. They were supposed to be made available, either mailed out to all residents or made available by a notification of how to come get them at the office. So if you haven't gotten it yet, I would immediately contact your park management to obtain the documents that you're entitled to. And we've seen a couple of the parks, as I mentioned, that have delayed getting them out or making them available. I think El Dorado might have been the longest delayed park, if I recall. And again, the city's confirming that those parks are going to agree to extend out the term from December 31st out into some date in January, depending upon how long the delay was, to allow extra time for residents to make their decision. The goal here is to allow 60 days from the time the documents are made available to the time residents have a deadline to choose to sign or not sign them. So it could be longer than December 31st. But if you don't have your documents, contact management. If that's not working, if somehow you're not getting through, I'd contact the City of Sunnyvale Housing Department and let them know to see if there's an issue that needs to be addressed by the city. We've also had some reports that residents were being told, you need to come to the office, you can view the document there, and it doesn't leave the office and you have to sign it at the office. That would be completely improper. I don't even know if that's happened. It seems as if we had at least some anecdotal evidence that some people might have been told that. That's not the way this is supposed to work. You should be able to take the document out of the office, take it home, sleep on it, get a cup of coffee in the morning when you can read it and you're fresh and you can understand it, so that you can talk to folks about it. You can get specific legal advice about it if you want. Talk to your family, talk to your pastor, your friends, whoever it is. But nobody should be made to sign a document only in the office. That would be improper, even though, again, we're talking about a document here that's already been run by the city and approved by the city. But we want to be sure everybody has a chance to make what we lawyers call a fully informed decision about whether to sign it. So hopefully those stories are just misinterpretations and haven't happened. But yeah, you want to be sure that you go ask for one.
All right, we have a question that was translated from Spanish. If I sign the MOU, will my 10-year contract be eliminated?
That's a good question that really is good for us to clarify. The answer is no. The MOU addendum that you will sign amends your existing contract. It's like it attaches itself to your existing lease. It doesn't blow it up. It doesn't make it go away. It just adds to it. The word that I would use is it supplements it. The rest of your lease continues in effect. So all the other non-financial terms of your lease will continue for as long as that document has to run according to its term, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The MOU concentrated on the financial provisions. It does not intend to amend any of the non-financial provisions.
All right. If the CPI goes up, HTA may raise our space rent over 3%. Already Tyson's Food has gone up 30%. I believe we should call our senator. Basically, this is asking about CPI. I'll let you all know, historically, CPI has hovered between 2% and 5%. So last year CPI was 1.6. The year before that was 2.9. The year before that was 3.5. And then before that, 3.6, 3.4, 3.0, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, and going back to 2012, 3. So that's a history of the CPIs of this region to give you a sense of where the CPI is hovering. As we get toward COVID recovery, we will probably see the CPIs increase a little bit more than normal. But the increases that the residents will face will still be limited by 75% of CPI or 3%, whichever is higher. The term of CPI is over 1 year. What I read was a February to February CPI, because that's easier for me to track. But if you look from a year, it would be around that range. The only time when you would pay more than 3% or limited to more than 3% would be if CPI is above 4%, and it hasn't actually been over 4% for over a decade. So I'm going to go back to a clarifying question for Mr. Staton. Did Bruce just say that the date started October 18th, meaning the first year began then, or from the time we sign?
Yeah, I believe that if I remember correctly, that the city's position is that the initial year of the resale protection is what we're really focusing on here, that the initial year of vacancy control at 5%, and each additional year would begin on the anniversary date of the signature. And I think that they're treating October 18th, if I recall, as a signature date. I could be wrong about the date being a couple of days off, and somebody here could certainly correct me if I am, but I believe that's the date that they're calculating. I wanted to mention about CPI as well, Emily, that's one of the reasons, the fear of inflation, if you will, is one of the reasons that we negotiated 75% of CPI as opposed to 100% of CPI, which is what the park owners wanted. And they bargained for that very, very hard, because at least one of the park owners was afraid of inflation and actually said they weren't going to sign this because of that provision. Well, they ended up agreeing to sign it anyway. But if we do get inflation that exceeds, 4%, and the percentage of CPI becomes relevant in calculating the annual adjustment amount, we can be glad that it's 75% and not 100% of CPI. Because I know a lot of people are concerned about inflation, and it probably will rise. We don't know how much, but there is a better protection for the residents than there is for the park owner in a time of inflation. So go ahead with the next one there.
Thank you for that. We have another question that was translated from Spanish. So they're asking, I believe this was the initial one who asked about the 10-year contract. Are they covered by the MOU and the 10-year contract? Will both cover them?
Well, the answer is really both, because if you signed the lease addendum, that addendum contains the MOU terms, and they become part of your existing contract. The addendum attaches to your existing contract. I saw a similar question that just had popped up in the chat about, do I have to sign a new lease? No, you don't have to sign a whole new lease. You're only signing the addendum. The word addendum is like an amendment. It's like a supplement, an extra set of terms that now apply to your existing contract. So We're not doing away with the old contract completely. We're just changing it. And you don't need to sign a whole new lease. You don't need to do that. No mobile home resident ever needs to sign a document once their current document expires. They could just automatically become month-to-month tenants. But no, so just to be clear, we're not signing a brand new, completely new lease, just what's called an addendum. And that document will be made available to you if it's not already, and has been reviewed by the city and approved by the city. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Our next question related to the CPI. Do you know what CPI has been for the past 5 years? I went over that. Are there more than one index used? So Mr. Bruce or Nadia, did you know the specific index that is being used? My understanding is all items, regional all items, urban. Does that sound about right to both of you? That is
Yes.
traditionally what you.
It's the San Francisco Bay Area Index. If you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, it's a US government office website. You'll see California has a few indexes. There's one for Los Angeles, Riverside. There's one for San Diego. There's one for San Francisco, Fremont, Hayward. I believe that's the one that we're using. And it's the all items index. There have been some times when park owners have been pretty crafty and they have said in their leases, we're only using the housing element index. Well, the housing element index in our area has been the highest of all of the items that go into the basket, if you will, that comprises the cost, the consumer price index, the cost of living. There's transportation and fuel and housing and food. We want all of it. We don't want just the housing, and nobody ever even suggested that. So it's all items together.
I will see if I could get a link to the CPI in the chat. Till then, we can move on to the next question. We have a specific case. We have been here in El Dorado for 33 years, and I believe we were told in the mail that we are month to month. Kind of surprising to me, but I guess it's possible. Given that the month-to-month tenants are automatically in, is there an advantage to signing now?
Well, yeah, if you've been there for 33 years, you're probably a month-to-month resident, unless you remember signing a 10-year lease, or a 20-year lease, which again, under law, you don't have to do. You can stay month-to-month as long as you wish. So as a month-to-month resident, you don't have to sign anything. Now, El Dorado has created a new month-to-month agreement. It's pretty lengthy, and it contains some terms that frankly are not advantageous to residents, such as a mandatory arbitration clause, which means you're waiving your right of trial by jury in case you ever wanted to sue the park for damages. Or a blanket indemnity clause that says you're indemnifying the park for anything and everything. And I've actually reviewed both Plaza del Rey and El Dorado offered month-to-month agreements, and provided some feedback to Gail Rubino, who's on our call and who has just posted the Bureau of Labor Statistics website. Thank you, Gail. So really, if you're automatically covered by the MOU as a month-to-month resident, you have to ask yourself, why would I sign a new agreement? The answer should be only if there's something in there that you like or that benefits you. And I don't know that you're going to find anything really. I think based upon my review, I would be advising month-to-month residents, don't sign anything new and just automatically become covered by the MOU.
Thank you. I have another question that is long.
Hey, Emily, before you do that, someone put in the chat that they're not able to hear in Spanish. I don't know if someone wants to just clarify how to get to interpretation.
Wonderful. To get to interpretation, if you click on the globe icon and select Spanish, you'll be able to hear the Spanish interpreters. I hope that is helpful.
Eric or Norma, do you want to translate that? If I don't know if that's possible.
They would.
Or put that in the chat. Sorry, all.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yeah.
All right, so now we have a long question. So we have a question from a participant on the holdover clause existing in a 10-year long-term lease with BSM. Item 17 in my existing lease says, quote, any holding over at the end of the term of this lease by the tenant with actual or implied consent of the landlord shall be deemed a month-to-month tenancy on the same terms and conditions of this lease, except landlord shall have the right upon notice as required by law to increase base rent to then current market base rent. Does that mean that the MOU notwithstanding, that the landlord could impose a market rate base rent at the end of the existing lease? Is this a loophole that landlords can use to force tenants to sign a new lease rather than go month to month when my lease expires in 2028?
Well, my answer to that would be, and first of all, the holdover clause is a very standard provision that you will find in almost any lease. And I see them in almost every mobile home long-term lease that I review from around the state. And basically, it just means that if you don't sign a new lease agreement for a fixed term of years, you're going to automatically become month to month. Because the expiration of a lease is not a ground that can be used to terminate a mobile home tenancy. You know, mobile home tenancies aren't like office leases. Like in my office lease, if I sign a 5-year lease and 5 years is up, if I don't leave, they could evict me because my lease is up. And if I haven't signed a new agreement, they'd say, you know, we want you out. Thankfully for mobile home residents, that's not the case. You can continue to stay after your lease expires as long as you wish, until you want to sell your home, until you pass away, until whatever you decide, as long as you pay your rent and don't bother people and don't have code violations and commit certain crimes on the park premises. So many of these documents do have these market catch-up clauses, I call them, where it'll say just before your lease expires, or if you become a holdover tenant, like the clause that you just read for us, Emily, that there's some other increase. My position is that increase is not enforceable because the park owners have signed the MOU and agreed to limit themselves to the increases that are in the MOU. Market catch-up increases are not in the MOU. So my assumption would be, and I'd have to review the lease addendum to see if that addresses it at all specifically, but my assumption would be that they cannot increase the rent to market pursuant to that holdover provision. But that's one more reason to sign the lease addendum, isn't it? Because if you don't sign the addendum and you're not covered by the MOU, if that provision says they could increase you even 1 day before it expires, then that would be a loophole, if you will.
Thank you for that. We actually have a more tangential question next. Many participants are aware that the park on Evelyn near Fair Oaks is gone and has been converted to condos or apartments. What protection, if any, do we have that that won't happen to us? Now I have a note here that this was not a mobile home park and that was covered by the MOU. This was formerly the Blue Bonnet Mobile Home Park. But did anyone, either of you, want to expand on the protections against conversions?
Well, I'll let Nadia can speak to that. She became an expert in that with the Winchester Ranch case, but I'll just say to preface it that the MOU doesn't address conversions at all, but take it away, Nadia.
I actually haven't looked, I should have looked at Sunnyvale's ordinance before, but I haven't looked at it in a long time, but I know that there are specific provisions in Sunnyvale that make it difficult, if not impossible, to convert in most of the mobile home parks. So yeah, so I think I'm pretty sure it would require a zoning change. So yeah, so if that does happen, definitely, or if you are worried that your park is at risk of conversion or closure, the state law and I believe Sunnyvale has really specific notice requirements. And so if you get that, it's really important to organize and to reach out to get legal help in order to ensure that your rights are protected. I worked on the closures both at Winchester and Buena Vista, which was preserved, and then Winchester, which was converted, but people were allowed to stay and got significant relocation benefits. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions offline.
Yeah, Nadia's right. And there's another thing I'll add, which is at GSMOL. GSMOL is the state residents organization statewide. We passed a law just 2 years ago that strengthens the state law regarding what's required for park owners to convert or close a mobile home park, and requires them to pay fair market value to mobile home residents if they do close the park. But Nadia is right. You should organize and try to fight the closure and try to stop it. If you can't stop it, you at least should be paid fair market value for your homes.
Thank you for that. So in summary, no rest for the righteous. So I hope that you all get to know your neighbors in case you do need to organize for further protections for your homes. We're going to move on to the next question. We're back to the resident in Plaza del Rey who had the 5-year Carlisle contract and signed a 25-year HTA contract. What should they do?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty open-ended question. Again, we're kind of back to the same issue. And I know that it's frustrating because I think, a lot of residents, when we've been having these calls, have said, please tell me what to do. And we can't really tell you what to do. All we can tell you is how to make your decision. If, as I previously answered, the MOU terms are going to automatically apply to the next lease that you've already signed, then you have to decide, do I want to be covered now by the MOU until the new lease takes effect and your current one expires? That's the question. And you need to compare what you have now with what the MOU provides and make the best choice.
Thank you for that. I understand that is a very frustrating answer to many people, but hopefully that will guide you to a better outcome.
And you can always seek more specific legal advice, from myself or Nadia's office or somebody who can sit down with you and help you. I really feel for the people that just feel overwhelmed by this. Emily, we had a person who had called in at one of the previous outreach sessions and just said, I'm just overwhelmed. I can't read this stuff. I don't know what it means. I'm the lawyer and I don't want to be. And how do I, navigate that? Reach out and get some assistance. Sometimes you might be able to just reach out to people in your park. Some of the resident representatives from the stakeholder group that I've been working with since January, we have people in each one of the parks. And these are people that have listened and learned and been involved in very actively and very, very importantly, they've contributed to these discussions. They know a lot about these documents and they can also help. And I know for some people, it might mean you got to get one-on-one help. You got to sit down with somebody and really work it through. That help is out there for you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I also in the chat, if you see in the chat, Nadia put in a link and a phone number for the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley for legal advice if you are low income. Otherwise, we'll send you to bother Bruce. All right. Next question is another one about the CPI. It's asking what is the term of the CPI? It is supposed to be over 1 year, but I'm unaware of what is their start month for when they're calculating the CPI or not. It usually doesn't matter as much. The general sense of no matter when you start and when you end, whether you shift from whichever months, it's about the same.
Yeah, in most leases, it will stipulate that they look at the CPI index, the last published index before they give you the rent increase notice. I think you're right, though, here. I think that you're right, Emily, that the MOU specifies February. I don't have it in front of me. I can't remember for sure. But I think that's it. That you have to pick a date where you're measuring the index. If you look at the CPI index, you'll see that it doesn't just speak in terms of a percentage. It has these data points. And the data points as they increase are a percentage of the prior year's data point, and then that results in a percentage. And the chart will show you all that, all the data points. Yeah.
All right. Next is, do we need to sign a new lease if we sign the MOU? i.e., do we need to sign both a lease and an MOU?
Well, you won't be signing the MOU itself. Only the park owners signed the MOU document. What you're going to sign is a lease addendum. So that's all you need to sign. You can get a copy of the MOU if you wish to just review it, but that's a contract between the city and the park owners. In that contract, it says the parks, by signing it, agree to offer an addendum to all the long-term lease holders. That's the document you sign. You don't sign a new lease. You don't sign the MOU. You sign a document called a lease addendum. That's what you're looking for. It's not a real lengthy document. It's about, as I recall, it's about 5 or 6 pages. It's not like a 30-page lease or a 30-page MOU.
Thank you for that. The next question is translated from Spanish. The MOU is a 10-year contract. If so, what will happen after this time? Will we continue to live month to month?
Well, first of all, the question is incorrect. The MOU is a 20-year agreement. It's not a 10-year agreement. If this is a person with a 10-year lease and they're asking what happens at the end of 10 years, well, you're going to automatically be covered by the MOU. So you can always sign a new lease of some kind if you want, but you don't have to be covered by the MOU. But the MOU is 20 years. So if you're on a lease right now, once that expires, you're going to continue to be covered as long as this MOU is in effect until the year 2041. I'm planning to retire before that.
The next question, I think, is a misunderstood question. I'm just going to read it out loud, and then we can probably parse out the misunderstanding there. It says, so if the quote begin date is in October, we don't really even have a year to sell if we are trying to take advantage of the 5% increase to new buyers, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Some of the time has already gone by, so that is correct. That's why we had the November 1st date as the date the document needed to be offered, so that it wouldn't be long after that October date. That's an issue, I suppose, that could be explored, frankly, because if the contracts weren't made available until late November, one could argue, the residents didn't even know about it and couldn't accept it if they're long-term leaseholders, and they didn't have a chance to really take advantage of the entire 12 months. I suppose if we get to next year, right, and we get to November of next year, and somebody says, I'm selling right now and I haven't had the full 12 months, we'll have to address that question then. But clearly the idea was to give people as close as possible a full 12 months in that initial window, resale window.
Thank you. For those, to clarify, I believe this was someone who had an initial question. To clarify, my lease expires in May. If I sign the MOU now, do I still sign a new lease in May?
Only if you want to, but you don't have to. Because in May, when your lease expires, the MOU will automatically apply to you as a month-to-month tenant. If you sign a new lease, if you choose to sign a new lease, you don't have to, but if you would for some reason choose to, that new lease will contain the MOU provisions.
Ooh, this one's a good question. For those who want the MOU, can they demand to only sign the MOU addendum, or can the park owner make them sign a combination of the MOU and a lease?
Well, again, I know that we were confused about this. No resident is signing the MOU. We have to be sure we understand. The MOU is a very lengthy 25-page document signed by the park owner and the city, okay? No resident is signing the MOU. That document that the park owner signs says they promise to offer something called a lease addendum for residents to review and sign if they wish to, which includes the financial terms of the MOU. That's all the resident needs to sign, the lease addendum. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but yeah, I know it's confusing, but when we say, residents, do we need to sign the MOU? Technically, no, you're not signing the MOU, just the lease addendum. Yeah.
So thank you everyone for your patience. We are about halfway through. We're coming up to the halfway point of our forum, and we still have plenty of questions. Please be sure to put them into the chat so that we could get them answered for you. The next question, can you please give a couple examples of pass-throughs and how much of an increase was applied to residents for what kind of projects?
There might be somebody on the call, such as Gail, who can chime in right after I start, or possibly Nadia as well. But I'll say, in my experience, the most common pass-throughs are for street repairs, and I'm not talking about slurry sealing a couple of areas. We're talking about, digging up roads and doing what's called a petromat overlay that digs down into the roadbed and puts a whole new membrane in and constructs a whole new road. Those can be very expensive. They could be $250,000, $400,000, depending upon the size of the park and how much roadway there is in the park. putting a new roof on the clubhouse, building a new perimeter fence, installing new lighting within the park, installing a new sewer system in the park, installing new water delivery system in the park. I mean, any expenditure that's more than $5,000 could be, under Internal Revenue Code rules, a capital expenditure. So those are just some examples of the types. In terms of amounts, it really depends upon the amount spent. You take the total amount spent, you amortize it over a number of years according to the useful life of the new thing that's being built. And then you divide by the number of spaces in the park. You know, in my experience, I've seen pass-throughs as low as $1.05 per month to, you know, $50 a month. But if somebody else here can give us examples of what some of the actual pass-throughs in Sunnyvale have been like, you know, feel free to chime in here. I don't want to be a one-man show.
So I'm gonna let Miss Gail continue more of that question answer.
There's been a few in Plaza. I think someone else can figure this one out for me. I think they replaced something in the front, and that was like 50 cents or something. But the biggest one in Plaza, and Bruce, you can explain this one, is the property tax through, because the Plaza, the Hometown America bought it from Carlisle, and there was a significant difference in the tax rate. Most of the other parks, including mine, El Dorado, have not used the pass-throughs.
Thank you.
Yeah, the property tax pass-through is kind of its own kind of creature, unlike other kinds of capital expenditures. And the MOU that the park owners signed do allow for that. They do have to amortize that over 5 years. And what we're talking about is the increased tax when there's what's called a change of ownership. If you're familiar with that thing called Proposition 13 that was passed by California voters back in, I believe, 1978. Under Proposition 13, any property owner can only get a tax increase above 2% if there's a change of ownership where the park is sold and transfers to a new owner. All of us who own real property are taxed at a property tax based rate, and every year we get a 2% increase. That's the max. But if you sell the property and the property transfers, that's the point where the assessor can raise it up to the current tax rate. That's how they get their extra revenue at that point. And that's why Plaza del Rey has now been given a notice of a pass-through, because that's the one park in Sunnyvale that's recently been sold, twice actually, within the last decade.
Hooray for laws before I was born. Woohoo. Okay. So I have another question about CPI, and they're looking at the CPI, the CPI website, and it varies each month. So we're going to go over a quick math lesson. If you're looking at the chart, you're going to see CPI values for February, April, June, August, October, and December. They do it every other month. What you're going to do in order to calculate that, if you want to calculate, I think this is going to be just a fun little math exercise, not really necessary, but fun nonetheless. We could take the most recent one, which is October, and it looks like the price of consumer goods is 313.265. You're going to take October of last year, subtract that amount, which was 301.736, divide that by last year's number and you'll get your percentage. That percentage is currently at 3.82. So this actually leads to the next question. What happens if CPI is above 3%? Well, this one's interesting because it chooses whichever is higher, at 3% or 75% of CPI. 75% of 3.82 is less than 3%. So currently, the max increase would be 3%. Yay, math. You really only have to worry about the 75% when CPI goes above 4%, which it hasn't done in a very long time, although it very well might at some point. And then at that point, you'll probably get like a 3.1%, 3.2%. We haven't had runaway inflation since like around the time I was born, like in the 80s. So we won't be seeing like a 20% CPI or anything like that. I hope that answers the question. A follow-up question from the Spanish. Oh, they're still asking about the MOU being a 10-year contract. The MOU is 20 years. And so I guess what happens after the 20 years? I guess we could ask that.
I mean, we don't know, right? Hopefully, before it expires, there would be a new series of meetings and negotiations between park owners and residents at that time to determine if we're going to extend out and either have a new MOU in terms of changing terms or perhaps just extending the existing document. Well, we don't know till then.
The fight is never over. All right, we have our next question. My partner has passed away and he signed the new 25-year lease that PDR encouraged us to sign. I believe that's Plaza Del Rey, and I'm so sorry for your loss. The lease takes effect in May 2022. Is the lease still legal since one of the signers has passed?
I would say that as long as one of the signers is still living and still living in the home, absolutely, it's still binding upon that person. I mean, I would always want to look at the document to see for myself, who signed it and who the document says it's between. But yeah, typically if more than one tenant signs, the surviving tenant or surviving tenants, if there's more than one, they're still bound by that, yeah.
Thank you. I have a comment that was in response about protections for mobile home conversions into apartments or condos. There in Sunnyvale, there is a 400-acre rule, which keeps 400 acres of designated mobile home park space in Sunnyvale. So that is one protection that Sunnyvale currently has to protect mobile home parks from being converted into apartments or condos. All right, we have a specific question. If you sign the 25-year lease, look at page 1 under whereas. The monthly space rent is higher than the MOU. Also, the selling price to the new buyer will be market rate on 2.2 on page 2. I'm not entirely sure if that was a question.
Well, I think I know. First of all, the MOU does not reduce existing rents. So if the rent on page 1 represents a rent that's already, well, I'm trying to figure out how to answer this. I mean, you never want to sign a document that contains a rent increase that either you don't agree to or that would exceed what the MOU says. That's first of all. But the MOU is not going to actually roll back rents or reduce them. It doesn't do that. It only regulates and stabilizes rents going forward. And if you're in Plaza del Rey, I can't remember if this person's in Plaza. I think they are. Remember that you still have that $2,250 cap as far as increases upon resale. I'm not answering the whole question because I kind of forgot the second part. Sorry.
That is okay. We have another question relating to Plaza del Rey. There are a lot of residents in Plaza whose leases expire in May. Plaza's anniversary date starts in May. If they don't sign the MOU now, what happens if their 90-day notice shows a higher rent than what the MOU allows? With their expiration in May and the anniversary date, could that happen?
No, that can't happen. They can't. And that goes back to the other question as well. They can't raise it above what the MOU says. So if there's a clause that says it goes to market, that clause is no longer applicable if you sign the addendum. Now, all those increases are subject to what the MOU allows, which is just one increase per year according to the terms of the MOU.
All right, that's good news for everyone, right? All right, the
Yes.
next question is there a list of stakeholder members in each park? How do we find out who the representative is for our particular park? Now, some of this has been answered in the chat, but I will see if I could track down. So we have for Adobe, Tim Kerr, Casa, Jason Feinsmith, or Christine, ooh, I don't know how to pronounce that, Ryzakowski. For El Dorado, we have Gail Rubino. Fair Oaks, we have Richard Matthew. For Mary Manor, we have Jonathan Beach. And for Rancho La Mesa, Fred Comeda. I'll see Fred Comeda also put in the chat. For Plaza, Julianne Oliveri, Judy Pavlik, Tanya Ivana, or Danny Mailer. I am so sorry if I butchered those names. We have a question for Bruce. Hi, Bruce. Would you be able to provide the SME contact for each park property, such as Casa de Amigos? What's SME?
Well, I think they're talking about management.
Oh,
Talking about, management companies. No, I don't have a list of all of those, but I will tell you that, first of all, when you live in a park under the mobile home residency law, you can always request in writing the name of the park owner and address, or management if there's offsite management, which in Plaza del Rey, for example, it's Hometown America. If you otherwise don't get that from your specific request, you can also find out who owns or manages park and address information by going to a website. It's the California Department of Housing and Community Development. The acronym for that is HCD. And if you go to hcd.ca.gov and click on the mobile home parks link, the drop-down item list will show find a park. And if you click on that, you can then type in the name of your park, and it will show you the name and address of whoever it is that has the permit to operate that park. So that'll give you the information as well. I think that's what the question was asking. It wasn't asking who the resident representatives were, which I think you just answered, Emily. It was asking how they could contact management, I think.
that was my.
Oh, I'm sorry. SME, subject matter expert.
Ah,
I'm not sure exactly what that means, subject matter expert. Maybe it is talking about the residents.
I guess in a quicker sense, could Gail, could you put Mr. Bruce's contact information in the chat, the best contact information if people have any questions? Also, Nadia already put the Law Foundation's contact should you need legal help if you are a low-income resident. So that is linked. Okay. So we will move on to the next question. Here we go. If you sign the MOU addendum now and have a Carlisle lease expiring in May 2022, are we covered by the terms of the addendum from now until May 2022, i.e. regarding the space fee increases and the space fee increases to new buyers? Or do the terms of the MOU addendum only apply after the May 2022 lease expires?
I'll just note that, yeah, Gail put an email address for me, which is correct. The phone number is not correct any longer, but if anybody wants to email me to retain me to have a private consultation, we can do that. And they should email me at the address there. No, if you sign the addendum now, you're covered until May. Yeah, you're signed it. If you sign the addendum, you're covered immediately.
And then assuming after the lease expires, they're automatically covered.
Correct.
So we are covered. Yay, all. All
Yeah,
right.
the only time you're not covered under your current lease is if you do not sign the addendum.
So we have a translated question from Spanish. Signing the MOU only gives the right to increase the lease to no more than 3%. Reminder, you are not signing the MOU. If you are month to month, the MOU automatically applies to you. What you are signing is a lease addendum. And it's usually no more than 3% unless it is 75% of CPI, which would only affect if CPI is over 4% in practice.
Yeah, it's basically going to be 3% unless we have large inflation. That's probably the best way to say it.
Which actually hasn't happened in a while,
A long time.
or at least more than 4%.
I think it's only exceeded 4% once in the last 20 some years, if I recall.
All right, we have a question of why are we considered commercial property versus residential property? How can we change this?
Well, I mean, mobile home park zoning is, mobile home parks are not actually commercial in terms of their zoning. They're zoned as multi or high density multi-residential property typically. Nadia probably has better information than I do from the work that she's done on the 2 park closures. But yeah, mobile home is really, I mean, a mobile home park business is a commercial business, but the zoning is not commercial.
Yeah, it can vary widely depending on what the city is. But I think in Sunnyvale, from what I remember, I think there's specific mobile home park zoning for most of the parks.
All right. Well, that's good. Next, we have a question. When I was in a condo, the homeowners association had a budget which was funded from the monthly fee. Don't parks plan for the high cost projects like roofs? How can they just pass through these kinds of costs?
Well, of course, if you live in an investor-owned park, it's not like a condominium where you own a piece of the rock. You know, a condominium, each of the people own an interest in the common area, and you all participate in your government, if you will. Certainly, a smart park owner should have things like reserve accounts and budget for that, but that's really depends on how the park owner wants to do business. There are cases, and believe me, I fought this issue many years ago. There are 2 appellate court cases, both of which I lost, which permitted park owners to pass through cost of operation. Has to be a cost of operation. It can't be an investment cost. It has to be a cost of actual operation that benefits the residents of the park. And there's a California Supreme Court case which upholds the right of a park owner to pass through property taxes in a rent control jurisdiction. So the pass-through battles have been fought and lost back in the 1990s, essentially. And we can't refight those battles. Pass-throughs are a legitimate way for park owners to pass through or to charge residents for certain costs. The idea is that the pass-through only lasts until the thing is paid off, and then it disappears. It's billed as a separate line item on the rent bill. It's not part of the base rent. So it's not calculated as part of the base rent when you're calculating future rent increases. It's a part of rent, but it's a separate line item.
All right, so we have another question that is translated from Spanish, but we do have an answer. So I'll read the question first. Do I pick up the MOU in the administration office, sign it, and who should I send it to? Or do I simply need to give it back to the park administrator? And Gail had the answer of this in our document. Each park has different instructions for signing the lease addendum. Please check with your park management on that. So next we have a thank you to Mr. Bruce for confirming that residents in Plaza del Rey do not need to sign with contracts that do not need to re-sign contracts that expire on the last day of April 2021. And the new date is May 1st, 2022. You are protected. That is correct. If you sign your lease addendum and at the moment your lease expires. All right, we have
No,
another.
but you have to sign the addendum within 60 days though.
Correct.
Yeah,
So be sure to sign your lease addendum.
by the end of this month.
Yes. Be sure to tell your neighbors too. Next, we have another Plaza del Rey question. How do you recommend Plaza del Rey residents get information on the tax pass-through? Management advises us that they will provide all the lot number versus saying what the pass-through is and showing us information. They will not provide anything in copies, only verbal. Carlisle tax pass-through was never passed through versus HTA now wants a tax pass-through. We are not sure if an assessment was done when the family sold the park to Carlisle or if it was ever assessed. That was a lot too.
Yeah, I don't want to get into this too deeply because in our limited time, we want to make sure that we're really answering MOU questions. As I've advised Plaza del Rey representatives, I'm happy to meet with folks and specifically dig into this issue. But I will say that the park owner, especially if you sign the MOU, is obligated to provide you with documentation that supports the pass-through. That's number one. And number two, the assessor, if you go to the assessor's website, you can actually see what property tax assessments are made against properties. If you have the assessor parcel number, you can look at that. So there's ways to get that information. But in good faith, the calculation should be provided by the park owner, and it should come actually in the notice of pass-through. The entire calculation should be there. But thankfully, with property tax, this is public records, and it should be obtainable.
Thank you for that. And actually, that was the last of our questions. So if you have any more questions, please drop them in the chat. We will try to, oh, things are getting a little bit more about the, okay, here we go. Sorry, distractions with the chat. So that was the last of our questions in the chat. If anyone else has any more questions, please drop it in the chat. We also have this meeting recorded. We will probably have it up in both channels for Livable Sunnyvale and SB at Home for future viewing. I'm not, and we also have the information for contacting Bruce and Nadia for specific legal questions for your unique situation. We hope that this was helpful for everyone. Okay, we have a property tax pass-through question. That seems really long.
My retirement's, Debbie, my retirement's not coming anytime soon, Debbie, but it's gonna happen before 20 years. That's all I meant. Go ahead, I'm sorry, Emily.
No problem. We do have in the chat a question of an example tax pass-through. Oh, so I'm gonna read it straight from the chat now. Can you confirm if this example is correct? Example, property tax pass-through. Previous year property tax, $100,000. New year property tax after reassessment due to sales, 100% increase is $15,000. Pass-through during years of 1 through 5, $3,000 per year divided by the number of homes. So the monthly amount per household per month would be 3,000 divided by 802 homes divided by 12 months. This is a lot of math, yo. So about 0.31 cents per month. Does that sound about right? That was a lot of math.
Yeah, you froze up there a little bit. And to be honest with you, at almost 8 o'clock at night, there is no way I'm gonna do a math problem. Sorry, Core. We'll have to talk about this when I'm fresher and I can see it all of it in front of me. I can't follow the math verbally. Math was not my major. That's why I became a lawyer. But yeah, sorry, I'd have to review that. I mean, it sounds reasonably correct, but I don't want to say, yeah, that's right, because you got to take the amount of increase, you got to amortize it over 5 years, you got to divide it by the number of spaces in the park. That's in general the way that we do it.
All right. We had a question regarding today's recording. It is recording right now. I know that SV at Home will have it on our YouTube channel within a day or so, depending on how lazy I am. And I believe Livable Sunnyvale will also have channels available where it could be uploaded. But please look at SV at Home's YouTube channel. Just search for Silicon Valley at Home, and you'll be able to find the recording there. Let's see. Yeah, thank yous. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah.
We have some time for any questions. If we have some time for any questions, if anyone has any more last minute questions, otherwise we can give you back 30 more minutes of your time. Seeing no questions in the chat, I think we're good. Thank you everyone for meeting with us. For those of you who registered for this, I believe we could probably send a follow-up email with a link to this recording and contact information to both Bruce and Nadia or the Law Foundation. If you have any additional questions or specific questions.
Emily, there's other questions in the chat.
There's more questions? I don't see any more questions, Ms. Gale. I see a lot of thank yous, which thank you, everyone. And one clarification, you should sign your lease addendum by the end of this year, December 31st. But that is if you're in a long-term lease. If you're a month-to-month, you are good. If anything else that you take away from this meeting, that is what you should take away.
Correct.
Oh, we have a question. What happens to the lease if we change the names on the title?
The lease has nothing to do with title. I mean, if you're changing names on title, the lease stays in effect. But I'd be careful about changing names on title to completely different people than what's on the lease, because typically the park rules require that the tenant also have a name on title. So you have to be, you have to know what the park rule is, and the tenant would still have to be at least one of the people on title. But you could add other people and it doesn't affect the lease.
Thank you for that. We have another question in the chat. How many people are zoomed in? There's currently 49 people, but I believe that peaked at 75. So good job organizing, y'all. Tell your neighbors. Oh, here we go. We're starting to get some last minute questions trickling in. If our current lease is better than the MOU supplement and expires in another 7 years, no need for us to sign? Question mark.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry, I wasn't sure I followed it.
Oh, if their current lease is better than what the MOU provides and it doesn't expire until for another 7 years, is there no need for them to sign?
Well, there's never a need for them to sign, ever. There's no need. Okay, it's a question of want, not need. So I want to be sure on our terms. But if you've compared your existing agreement, which has 7 years to run, with the MOU, and you believe the existing 7-year agreement is better, then yeah, you could just stay under that. And then when that expires, the MOU will automatically apply to the next agreement. But that's your choice.
And remember that some of the protections of the MOU is a maximum. So like they cannot raise your rent more than 3% or 75% of CPI. But they can say, have their new lease be 2%, 1%, 0.5% if they want to. They're just limited to the 3% or 75% of CPI with the increase upon turnover. If they want to give you a nice, better deal on that, as long as they don't exceed what is in the MOU, they should be able to do that. Nothing's preventing you from getting a better deal than the MOU. The MOU is the most that they can do. That's a correct assessment, right, Mr. Bruce?
Yeah, that's probably not usually going to happen, but absolutely.
All right, so that seems to be
Okay.
the end of our questions. So shall we call it a day, y'all?
I'm ready.
Thank you all for joining us. We're going to have our Livable Sunnyvale hosts close us out.
Thank you
Would
all.
that be me or would that be Julia?